It was supposed to be a simple flight, a father trying to get to his daughter's graduation. But for David Chanot, a routine check-in at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was about to become a battleground. He was about to be publicly humiliated, denied boarding, and treated like a criminal by an airline employee on a power trip. What she didn't know, what nobody in that terminal knew, was that the man she was targeting held the fate of her entire airline in the palm of his hand. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's a story of devastating real-life karma. And it all started with a single, fateful decision at Gate B32. The pen felt unusually heavy in David Chanot's hand. It was a standard-issue, government ballpoint black plastic with a silver clip, but on this Thursday afternoon, it carried the weight of an entire airline. The document splayed across his mahogany desk in Washington, D.C., was thick-bound in a blue cover, stamped with the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. The title read, Emergency Order of Suspension Air Carrier Operating Certificate A2UG E789 Orajet Airlines Inc. for 3 months. David, the FAA's Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety, had lived and breathed the Orajet investigation. It had started with a whistleblower, a terrified maintenance chief from their Las Vegas hub, who spoke of falsified repair logs and pencil-whipped inspections. That thread, when pulled, unraveled a tapestry of corporate malfeasance that chilled David to his core. There were incidents of flights taking off with known hydraulic fluid leaks, pilots pushed beyond their legal flight hour limits, and a pattern of using unapproved substandard parts for critical engine repairs to cut costs. His team had worked tirelessly, amassing a mountain of evidence. David had personally reviewed the final report, his stomach tightening with each page. He saw the faces of the passengers in his mind, the families going to Disney World, the business travelers, the students flying home, all blissfully unaware that the aircraft they were boarding was a ticking time bomb, held together by negligence and greed. The final straw had been an internal memo leaked from Orajet's executive suite, where the CEO, a man named Gavin Price, had explicitly stated, "We will absorb the risk of fines before we absorb the cost of grounding aircraft. Keep them in the air." That was it. The order was drafted. David's signature was the final, irreversible step. With a steady hand, he signed his name, David R. Chanot. He leaned back the leather of his chair, groaning in the quiet office. The legal machinery was now in motion. The order would be sealed and transmitted to the Department of Justice and other relevant agencies. It wouldn't be served to Orajet's corporate headquarters in Dallas until Friday morning at 9:00 a.m. Central Time. The public announcement would follow an hour later. For the next 18 hours, Orajet would continue to operate as if nothing was wrong, a ghost airline flying on borrowed time. David felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a grim satisfaction. He had done his job. He had protected the public. Now, a more personal duty called. His daughter Maya was graduating from the University of Washington with a degree in computer science. He hadn't seen her in 4 months, and he'd promised he would be there in Seattle for her ceremony on Friday evening, no matter what. He looked at his watch. 4:15 p.m. His flight from Reagan National to Atlanta, the first leg of his journey, was at 6:00 p.m. His connecting flight to Seattle was out of Atlanta, the hub of all hubs. He'd booked the last flight of the night on Orajet. The irony was not lost on him. He knew their fleet better than almost anyone, and he knew this specific aircraft, a Boeing 737, had just come out of a D-check and was one of the few truly airworthy planes they had. He'd checked. He grabbed his briefcase and his carry-on, a simple leather weekender bag. He took off his suit jacket, replacing it with a comfortable grey quarter-zip sweater. Dressed in dark slacks and the sweater, he looked less like a high-ranking federal official and more like any other tired traveler. He wanted it that way. He wanted to be anonymous, just a dad going to see his daughter. The flight to Hartsfield-Jackson was uneventful. He dozed the drone of the engines a familiar lullaby. He landed in Atlanta a little after 8:00 p.m. The airport was a living, breathing creature, a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the blended aromas of fast food and disinfectant. His connecting flight, Aurajet 714 to Seattle, was scheduled to depart at 10:45 p.m. from Concourse B. He had plenty of time. He found a seat at a bar near his gate, ordered a club soda, and watched the river of humanity flow by. He felt a sense of calm detachment, the calm after the storm of the investigation. The heavy decision was made. Now all that was left was the fallout and his daughter's smile. At 9:30 p.m., he finished his drink and ambled toward Gate B32. The area was already crowded. Aurajet, as a budget carrier, packed its gate areas with anxious passengers, all vying for position, paranoid about carry-on space. The digital screen above the counter flickered AJ 714, Seattle, on time, 10:45 p.m. Behind the counter stood two agents. One was a young man efficiently tagging bags and answering questions with a practiced, if weary, politeness. The other was a woman in her late 40s. Her name tag read Karen. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her face was set in a mask of strained patience, as if she were personally offended by the existence of every passenger in front of her. She was snapping at people, her voice a sharp, cutting instrument. "Sir, your bag is clearly oversized. You have to use the sizer. It's not a suggestion. Ma'am, everyone is in a boarding group. You will board with your group. No, I cannot change your seat for free. This isn't a charity." David sighed internally. He knew the type. An employee who felt powerless in their own life and wielded the tiny sliver of authority their job afforded them like a medieval mace. He decided to wait for the male agent's line, which was unfortunately much longer. He checked his watch. He still had time. But as luck would have it, the male agent's computer terminal suddenly blinked out. He tapped the screen, rebooted it, and then threw his hands up in defeat, shaking his head at Karen. "Systems frozen solid. I have to go find a tech supervisor. Can you handle the check-ins?" Karen Foster's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "Of course I can handle it." The line was now consolidated into one feeding directly to her. David found himself shuffled forward until there were only two people ahead of him. His sense of peace began to evaporate, replaced by a low-level hum of apprehension. He just wanted to get on the plane. The passenger in front of David was a young woman, clearly a nervous flyer, who was asking about the turbulence forecast. Karen Foster looked at her as if she'd just asked for the nuclear launch codes. "Ma'am, this is an airplane. It flies in the sky. There might be bumps. If you can't handle that, you probably shouldn't be flying." Karen snipped, her voice dripping with condescension. The young woman flushed crimson, mumbled an apology, and scurried away with her boarding pass. Then it was David's turn. He stepped forward and placed his driver's license and phone, displaying his digital boarding pass on the counter. He offered a polite, neutral smile. "Good evening. Just checking in." Karen didn't return the smile. She didn't even make eye contact. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, flickered from his face to the license then back again. She picked up the license, holding it by the very edges as if it were contaminated. David R. Chenault, she said her pronunciation of his last name. Chenault, slow and deliberate, as if it were a foreign word she was struggling to decipher. "That's me," David said, keeping his tone light. She typed his name into her keyboard with a series of sharp, angry taps. She stared at the screen for a long moment. David could see the passenger manifest. His name was right there, highlighted in green. Confirmed. Paid. Seat 12C. "I'm going to need to see another form of identification," she said, flatly, her eyes still glued to the screen. David blinked. "Is there a problem with my driver's license?" It was a valid Georgia license. Real ID, compliant. It's our policy to sometimes require a secondary ID for verification. A credit card with the same name will do. Her tone implied he was being difficult. This was the first flag. While not unheard of, it was rare and usually triggered by a ticketing issue. David maintained his composure. He pulled out his wallet and produced a corporate American Express card. David R. Chenault, U.S. Government. Karen took the card, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the government designation. She looked from the card to the license, then back to his face. For a moment, David thought her expression softened, a flicker of professional courtesy, perhaps. He was wrong. It hardened into something else. Suspicion. "This middle initial," she said, tapping the R on his license with a long manicured nail. "What does it stand for, Robert?" David answered, a knot of irritation beginning to form in his stomach. "Why? The name on your ticket is just David Chenault. There's no middle initial. That's a discrepancy." This was utterly absurd. No airline in the world cared about a middle initial that was present on an ID but absent from a ticket. The reverse could sometimes cause a flag, but not this. This was a pretext. "I can assure you that's never been an issue on any flight I've ever taken," David said, his voice firm but still respectful. "My name is David Chenault. The license and the credit card both confirm that." "Sir, you may not be familiar with our security protocols," Karen said, emphasizing the word "our," as if Orajet operated under its own special jurisdiction. Discrepancies like this require additional screening. "Please step to the side. I will have to call a supervisor." The public nature of the confrontation was beginning to draw stares. People in line were shifting, their curiosity piqued. David felt a familiar hot flush of anger and humiliation creep up his neck. He knew exactly what this was. He'd experienced it before, in different forms, throughout his life. It was the quiet, insidious machinery of prejudice, cloaked in the flimsy guise of procedure. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. An outburst would only validate her actions in the eyes of onlookers. "I'd be happy to speak with a supervisor," he said, his voice low and even. He stepped aside, his jaw tight. Karen picked up her desk phone and spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Mark, it's Karen at B32. I have a passenger here, a David Chenault." "Yes." "No, the ID looks real, but there's a discrepancy with the ticket name. He's becoming agitated. I think you should come down." Agitated, David stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. He was the picture of calm. She was manufacturing a narrative. A few minutes later, a man in a slightly too tight suit bustled up. He was in his 30s, with slicked back hair and a harried expression. His name tag read, "Mark Jenkins, Duty Manager." "What's the problem here, Mark?" asked, not looking at David, but directly at Karen. "This passenger's ID doesn't fully match the ticket, and his secondary ID is a government card which is another flag Karen reported, as if she'd uncovered a conspiracy. I told him he requires additional screening, and he's refusing to cooperate. This was a bold-faced lie. David hadn't refused anything. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir. My name is David Chanot. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Your agent is claiming my middle initial is a discrepancy, which is baseless. I have not refused anything. I simply stated that I've never had this issue before, and I would like to check in for my flight." Mark Jenkins finally turned to look at David. He gave him a quick, dismissive up-and-down glance. It was the kind of look that took in his comfortable sweater, his dark skin, and came to a swift, pre-packaged conclusion. Sir Mark began, his voice oozing with a smug, patronizing tone. "Our agents are trained to spot irregularities. We live in a post-9/11 world. Security is our top priority. If Karen says there's an issue, we have to take it seriously. It's nothing personal." The phrase, "it's nothing personal," was in David's experience almost always a preface to something deeply personal. What specifically is the irregularity? David pressed his patience, wearing dangerously thin. "The name is the same. The photo is me. The birth date is correct. The middle initial. It's the totality of the circumstances." Mark said vaguely, "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you submit to a full baggage search and a personal pat-down by TSA right here. The hard way is I deny you boarding and have airport security escort you out of the terminal." It was a threat, a blatant abuse of power. They were presenting him with a choice: accept this public humiliation or miss his flight, miss his daughter's graduation. They were counting on his desperation. They had picked the wrong man. This was no longer just about a flight. This was a symptom of the same rotten culture of corner-cutting and negligence he had just crucified Orajet for in his official report. The rot wasn't just in the maintenance hangars, it was right here at the customer-facing front lines, a culture that didn't follow rules but invented them to harass people. David looked from Mark's smirking face to Karen's triumphant one. They thought they had him. They thought he was just another black man they could push around. He made a decision. He would not be humiliated. He would not be intimidated. He would not play their game. "I see," David said, his voice suddenly calm, almost serene. The anger had cooled and hardened into something else: purpose. "So to be clear, as the duty manager for Orajet Airlines, you are officially refusing to check me in for my ticketed and confirmed flight AJ 714 to Seattle." Mark Jenkins puffed out his chest. "If you refuse the additional security screening, then yes, that's my final decision." "Very well," David said. He took a step back from the counter, pulling out his phone. The other passengers were now openly staring, some recording with their own phones. A small, self-contained drama playing out at gate B32. "What are you doing?" Karen demanded. "You can't record us." "I'm not recording you," David said quietly. He wasn't. He was making a phone call. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he rarely called outside of work hours. Elizabeth Soto, Chief of Staff. Mark and Karen exchanged a look, a mixture of annoyance and victory. They believed they had won. They watched as David put the phone to his ear, expecting him to be calling a lawyer or his wife or someone to complain to. They had no idea he was calling the person who would, with a single command, begin the process of dismantling their entire world. Elizabeth Soto answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert, even at nearly 10:00 p.m. on a Thursday. "David, is everything okay?" She knew he was traveling. A call this late meant something was wrong. "Elizabeth, I'm fine. Apologies for the late call, David said, his voice a controlled, level monotone. He turned his back slightly to the counter to afford himself a sliver of privacy, though he knew he was the center of attention. I need you to do something for me. Are you at a computer? Always, she replied. What's going on? I need you to release the Aurajet suspension order, effective immediately. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the distant hum of the server farm in Elizabeth's home office. The plan, meticulously crafted by lawyers and communications experts, had been to execute the order at 9:00 a.m. Central Time. An immediate, unscheduled release was unprecedented. David, are you sure? Elizabeth asked, her voice laced with concern. That's not the protocol. The DOJ isn't in position. Our press office is dark. It will be chaos. I am aware of the protocol, Elizabeth. I wrote half of it. David stated, a hint of steel entering his voice. And I am aware of the consequences. There's a developing situation here that makes this action not just necessary, but imperative. It speaks directly to the heart of the matter. He didn't need to explain further. Elizabeth had worked with him for a decade. She trusted his judgment implicitly. If he was willing to blow up a carefully laid plan, his reasons had to be profound. Okay, she said, the sound of determined typing clicking through the phone. Initiating the 705 order release now. I'm transmitting the signed document to the service agents in Dallas and the primary aviation newswires. I'm also pushing the public notice to the FAA website. It will be live in 90 seconds. She paused. David, what's happening? Aurajet is giving me a live, real-time demonstration of the corporate culture cited in our findings, he said, cryptically. A culture of contempt for rules, regulations, and people. It seems their disregard for safety protocols extends to their customer service protocols as well. He looked over his shoulder. Karen Foster was whispering to Mark Jenkins, pointing at David and rolling her eyes. They both shared a smug little laugh. They saw a man on his phone, defeated. The order is transmitting now, Elizabeth confirmed. It's out, it's done. Godspeed, David. Thank you, Elizabeth, he said, and ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and stood there waiting. He didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at the other passengers. He looked at the large flight information display screen on the wall opposite the gate, the one that showed dozens of flights, airlines, and destinations. And he waited. For a minute, nothing happened. The world continued as before. The line behind him grumbled. A baby cried. An announcement for a flight to Fort Lauderdale echoed through the concourse. Karen and Mark had turned their attention to the next passenger, a teenager with a guitar case. Then, Mark Jenkins's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. And again. With an exasperated sigh, he pulled it out, annoyed at the interruption. He glanced at the screen. His smug expression vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. It was a text alert from Aurajet's internal operations channel. Urgent. All Aurajet flight crews and station managers. FAA emergency order. 705 received. Air carrier certificate suspended, effective immediately. All flights are grounded. Repeat. All Aurajet operations are to cease immediately. Stand by for further instructions. Mark's face went pale. He read the message again, his eyes wide with disbelief. This had to be a mistake, a hack, a prank. His phone immediately began to ring the caller ID, flashing SVP Flight Operations. DFW, the senior vice president, calling him a lowly duty manager in Atlanta. He swiped to answer, his hand trembling. Mr. Davies? Yes, sir, I just got the alert. What's happening? He listened, his face turning from pale to a ghastly waxy white. The blood seemed to drain from it entirely. He brought a hand up to his forehead, wiping away a sudden sheen of sweat. No, sir, he stammered, his voice cracking. No, I had no prior indication. Nothing. Yes, sir, our last departure was an hour ago. No, everything is normal. He trailed off, his eyes darting wildly around the gate area. They scanned the crowd, the departures board, and then they landed on David Chanel. David was still standing there, patiently watching him. And in that instant, a connection was made in Mark's terrified mind. The government ID, the strange calm, the phone call, a passenger named David Chanel. He felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to brace himself against the counter. Sir, Mark whispered into the phone, his voice barely audible. I may have a problem here at gate B32. A very serious problem. Simultaneously, Karen Foster, oblivious, was arguing with the teenager about his guitar. It does not fit in the overhead. You'll have to gate check it. Suddenly, the large departures board on the wall, the one David had been watching, flickered. Next to every single flight listed under the Aurajet logo, the green on-time status switched to a stark flashing red, cancelled. A collective gasp went through the crowd at gate B32. Then, a wave of groans and angry shouts erupted. What do you mean cancelled? It said on time 2 minutes ago. I have to be in Seattle for a meeting. Karen was momentarily stunned, staring at the board. That has to be a system error, she said, to no one in particular. Then her own terminal, the one that had been working perfectly, flashed a red pop-up window. Terminal lockout. Carrier certificate invalid. Her head snapped back toward Mark, who was now leaning heavily against the wall, his face a mask of pure terror as he listened to his boss screaming through the phone. And then Mark did something that sealed Karen's fate. He slowly, deliberately pointed a trembling finger at David Chanel. Karen followed his gaze. She looked at David, truly looked at him, for the first time. Not as a problem, not as a suspicious person, but as the focal point of the chaos that had just descended upon them. She saw the calm in his eyes, the utter lack of surprise. She saw the quarter-zip sweater and the dark slacks, and suddenly she didn't see a man trying to get away with something. She saw a man who was watching the consequences of his own actions unfold. The pieces began to click together in her mind, with the horrifying finality of a coffin lid closing. The name, the government ID, the phone call, the immediate catastrophic system-wide shutdown. It wasn't a coincidence. It was cause and effect. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The air in her lungs turned to ice. That man, the man she had belittled, lied about, and tried to humiliate over a non-existent middle initial. Who was he? The answer came from the television above the bar, down the concourse. The local news channel, which had been showing a sports replay, cut to a breaking news alert. The red banner at the bottom of the screen was stark: FA Grounds Aurajet Airlines nationwide sighting, imminent and serious safety risks. The camera cut to a stern-looking official photo of the FAA Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety, the man whose signature was on the order. It was him. It was David R. Chanel. Karen Foster looked from the face on the television screen to the man standing 10 feet away. They were the same. The man whose flight she had refused to check in was the very regulator who had just suspended her airline's license to operate. She made a small, choking sound. The world began to spin. The angry shouts of the passengers faded into a dull roar. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the stool behind the counter, her mind a screaming void of a single repeating thought. What have I done? The chaos at Gate B32 was a microcosm of the pandemonium erupting at every Orajet gate in every airport across the country. Passengers suddenly stranded surged toward the counter, a wave of anger and confusion. But Karen Foster barely heard them. The face on the news screen, identical to the one standing before her, had short-circuited her brain. The sheer calamitous scale of her miscalculation was too vast to comprehend. Mark Jenkins, still on the phone, was now pleading. "Sir, I didn't know. How could I have known who he was? He was just a passenger." The furious, tinny voice on the other end was audible even from a few feet away. Mark flinched, holding the phone away from his ear. "Yes, sir, I understand. Fired. Yes, sir." He hung up. The phone slipped from his sweaty hand and clattered onto the floor. His career, which he had so carefully cultivated through sycophancy and petty power plays, had just evaporated in the space of 3 minutes. He stared at David Cheneau, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic appeal. He looked like a man about to be swept away by a tsunami begging the wave to reconsider. David met his gaze, his expression unreadable. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a profound weariness. He had not wanted this. He had not orchestrated this specific personal confrontation, but he would not shy away from its implications. The rot he had set out to excise had presented itself to him in the most direct way imaginable. The first airport police officer arrived, drawn by the growing commotion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his hand resting on his service weapon. Before Mark, or a suddenly catatonic Karen, could respond, David stepped forward. He reached into his briefcase, which he'd calmly placed on the floor beside him, and retrieved a slim leather folio. He opened it and presented it to the officer. "Deputy Administrator David Cheneau, FAA," he said, his voice carrying clearly above the din. "There's a federal order in effect. This airline's operations have been suspended. They are no longer authorized to operate." The officer looked from the impressive federal credentials to David's face, then back again. His posture immediately changed, shifting from confrontational to deferential. "Yes, sir. We just got the notification. What do you need?" "I need you to maintain order," David said calmly. "These passengers are the victims here. They're going to need assistance with rebooking and information which this airline is now incapable of providing. Please coordinate with airport operations to manage the situation." "Right away, sir." The officer keyed his radio, calling for backup to manage the crowd. David then turned his attention to Mark Jenkins, who seemed to have shrunk inside his suit. "Mr. Jenkins," David said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your Senior Vice President of Operations, Mr. Davies, would like a word with you. I suspect your next call should be to your personal attorney." Mark flinched as if struck. He nodded dumbly, unable to form words. David's gaze finally fell upon Karen Foster. She was still sitting on the stool, her face ashen, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with a terrifying cocktail of fear and dawning comprehension. The condescension, the power, the sneer. It had all been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, terrified woman who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. "Ma'am," David said, and the simple, polite word was more cutting than any insult could have been. You were concerned about a discrepancy. I believe the situation has been clarified. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply stated a fact. And in that moment, Karen's unraveling was complete. A dry, ragged sob escaped her lips. This was the moment a passenger's phone, which had been recording the entire exchange since the argument began, captured perfectly. The video would later go viral. It showed David calm and authoritative. It showed Mark pale and defeated. And it showed Karen, the belligerent agent, breaking down completely as the consequences of her actions crashed down upon her. The clip titled, "Gate Agent Tries to Flex on the FAA Regulator Who Grounds Her Entire Airline," would have 20 million views by sunrise. The news was spreading through the financial world like a shockwave. On the CNBC ticker, scrolling across the bottom of the news screen at the bar, a new line appeared. Orajet parent company, Eura Holdings, NYSE, AUH, trading halted pending news. Last trade down 42% in after-hours market. Billions of dollars in market capitalization had just been vaporized. The signature on David's order, turbocharged by Karen's hubris, had become a weapon of financial mass destruction. More airport officials and police arrived, setting up barricades and trying to manage the irate passengers. A senior airport operations manager, a woman named Patricia Cole, rushed up to David, her face flushed. "Mr. Chenol, Patricia Cole, Director of Airport Operations. We're trying to get ahead of this. We've been told Orajet is defunct, for lack of a better word. We have thousands of their passengers system-wide, hundreds here in Atlanta." "I understand, Ms. Cole," David said. "My primary concern right now is passenger welfare. They need to be reaccommodated. Are the other carriers being cooperative? They're scrambling, but yes, Delta and United are already adding flights and capping fares for stranded Orajet ticket holders. Your office's advance work on that contingency plan is paying off." David nodded. A small mercy. Part of his team's planning for the suspension included pre-negotiated agreements with major carriers to absorb the passenger load and prevent price gouging. He had been so immersed in the safety aspect that he'd nearly forgotten the economic and logistical fallout they had planned for. He looked at his watch. 11:15 p.m. His flight was gone. The airline was gone. His straight path to Seattle was gone. He was still just a father trying to get to a graduation. "Ms. Cole," he said, "is there any possible way I can get to Seattle tonight?" Patricia Cole blinked, momentarily taken aback by the shift from Federal Crisis Manager to weary traveler. "Sir, you just brought down an entire airline. I think we can find you a seat. Let me make a call." As she walked away, speaking urgently into her phone, David took one last look at the scene. Mark Jenkins was being quietly spoken to by two stern-looking airport officials. Karen Foster was being led away by another official, a woman who had a gentle hand on her arm. Karen was weeping openly now, a broken figure, adrift in the wreckage she had helped create. David felt no joy. He felt no satisfaction. He only felt the crushing weight of it all, the necessity of his actions and the ugly personal reality of their consequences. The system had worked. Justice, in a brutal and efficient way, had been served. But it felt less like a victory and more like a tragedy, played out under the harsh fluorescent lights of Gate B32. He had a feeling the story wasn't over. The karma for everyone involved was just getting started. By the time David Chenol was settled into a first-class seat on a red-eye Delta flight to Seattle, a courtesy arranged by a very grateful airport director, the story had already mutated into a viral sensation. The passenger's video, shaky but damningly clear, was the spark. News outlets hungry for a human interest angle to the massive business story seized upon it. The initial headline from a popular news aggregator read, "Regulator, grounded airline shut down by FAA over major safety violations." An hour later, the narrative had shifted. The new headline screamed video shows Regulator agent refusing to board FAA official moments before he shut the airline down. The story now had heroes and villains. David Chenault was cast as a modern-day folk hero, a cool-headed enforcer of justice who wouldn't tolerate abuse. #FAA boss trended on Twitter. Memes proliferated David's face, photoshopped onto the body of Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction. His briefcase opened to reveal a glowing FAA order. But for every hero, there must be a villain. And the internet, with its insatiable appetite for righteous fury, had found its target, Karen Foster. Her name visible on her tag in a high-resolution screenshot from the video was all it took. Within hours, amateur sleuths on platforms like Reddit and 4chan had unearthed her digital life, her Facebook profile, her LinkedIn page, her old MySpace account, photos of her with her 2 cats, a picture from her niece's christening, a post complaining about traffic on I-285. Every mundane detail of her life was exhumed and put on public display, recontextualized as evidence of her villainy. She became Gatekeeper Karen, the face of petty tyranny and racial prejudice. Her actions were dissected, analyzed, and condemned by millions of people who had not been there. The narrative was simple and brutal. She was a racist who picked the wrong person to bully, and her comeuppance was glorious. The consequences were swift and merciless. Regulator, or what was left of its corporate communications department, issued a statement before dawn. The actions of the employees in the video are deeply regrettable and do not reflect the values of Regulator. Both individuals have been terminated effective immediately. It was a futile gesture, like throwing a deck chair off the Titanic. Karen's personal information, including her home address and phone number, was leaked onto a public forum. The harassment began almost immediately. Her phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls from unknown numbers, filled with vitriol and threats. Her email inbox was flooded. Pizzas, dozens of them, began arriving at her modest suburban home, all unordered, all COD. When she finally made it home from the airport, escorted by a shell-shocked cousin, she found her front lawn littered with rolls of toilet paper and a sign spray-painted on her driveway, "Fly the racist skies." She unplugged her landline and turned off her phone. She sat in the dark, the blue light of her neighbor's security camera blinking through the blinds. The viral video was playing on a loop in her head, but from an angle no one else could see. She saw herself, yes, but she saw a version of herself she barely recognized. A woman stretched to her breaking point. For 6 months, Regulator had been a pressure cooker. Rumors of bankruptcy, constant threats of layoffs. They had cut staff to the bone. She was regularly working 60-hour weeks, covering multiple gates, dealing with endless streams of angry customers, upset about the airline's constant nickel and diming. Her supervisor, Mark Jenkins, was a master of passing the buck, leaving his frontline agents to absorb all the public's fury. Did she resent her job? Yes. Was she short-tempered? Absolutely. But was she a racist monster? In her heart, she didn't believe so. She saw a black man, yes, but what she really saw was another problem in a day full of them. Her reaction, she told herself, wasn't about his race. It was about her stress. He was calm, well-dressed, and articulate, which in her warped, exhausted mindset felt like a challenge. A man who wasn't harried and frantic like everyone else seemed suspicious. So she fell back on the only tool she had: procedure. She weaponized the rulebook, stretching and inventing regulations to assert a control she felt she lacked everywhere else in her life. It was a pathetic power play born of misery. But nuance is the first casualty of a viral story. The internet had no time for her stress or her bad day. It saw only the act itself, captured in stark video, and judged it accordingly. She was the nail that stuck up, and she was being hammered down with the full force of the digital world. Mark Jenkins fared little better. His LinkedIn profile was swamped with mocking comments. His alma mater, the University of Georgia, was tagged in posts demanding they denounce him. A local news crew camped out on the street in front of his apartment building. He had deleted his social media, but the damage was done. He was unemployable in the aviation industry, a walking case study in how not to manage a crisis. The hard karma was this. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing a name, a reputation. It was about becoming a public caricature, a symbol of everything wrong, stripped of humanity and privacy. The justice David Cheneau had delivered was institutional. The punishment the internet delivered was personal, invasive, and unending. It was a digital guillotining, and there was no appeal. Karen Foster, sitting in her dark living room, was not just unemployed. She had been erased, and a monster had been drawn in her place. She had wanted to make one man feel small and powerless for a few minutes, and in return, the entire world had made her feel small and powerless forever. David landed in Seattle as the sun was beginning to cast a pale, watery light over Puget Sound. He had slept for maybe an hour. His government-issued phone had been buzzing non-stop since Elizabeth's call, but he had put it in airplane mode, creating a temporary sanctuary at 37,000 feet. He needed the silence. His daughter Maya was waiting for him just past security, her face a mixture of relief and amusement. She was tall and brilliant, with his eyes and her mother's easy smile. She ran and threw her arms around him. "Dad, I was so worried. Then I saw your face on CNN," she said, pulling back and looking at him. "They're calling you the Avenger of the FAA." David managed a tired smile. "Please don't ever call me that. Let's get out of here." In the car on the way to her apartment near Lake Union, she handed him her phone. "You should probably see this." It was the viral video. He watched it once, his expression grim. He saw his own forced patience, the smugness on Mark Jenkins's face, and Karen Foster's escalating hostility. He saw the moment the truth dawned on her, the collapse. "They found her address, Dad. They're sending her death threats," Maya said, quietly, her tone stripped of its earlier amusement. "It's a lot." David handed the phone back. He stared out the window at the passing emerald landscape, a world away from the sterile chaos of the airport. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a deep, unsettling sadness. What she and her manager did was wrong, David said, thinking aloud, more than speaking to Maya. It was an abuse of authority, unprofessional, and tinged with a prejudice that our society can't seem to shake. It was also a perfect example of the toxic corporate culture at Orajet, a culture that endangered lives. My actions, the suspension order, were justified, necessary. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But this, he gestured vaguely toward the phone. This mob justice, this glee people are taking in the complete destruction of a person's life, it's something else. It's not about justice, it's about vengeance, and there's very little satisfaction in it. They spent the rest of the day in a bubble of normalcy. They walked by the water, he helped her pack the last of her college boxes, and they had lunch at her favorite Thai restaurant. He was just Dad, but the outside world kept intruding. His phone, when he finally turned it on, had hundreds of texts and emails, messages of support from colleagues, requests for interviews from every major news network, and a surprisingly heartfelt note of thanks from the head of the Flight Attendants Union. The graduation ceremony was that evening in the university's main arena. As he watched Maya walk across the stage, her name called out, a wide, bright smile on her face, he felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated pride. This was why he fought so hard, to ensure that the world his daughter and her generation inherited was a little safer, a little fairer, to ensure that the systems designed to protect people actually worked. Later that night, celebrating with Maya and her friends, he overheard a conversation. "Did you see that video of the airline agent?" one of her friends asked. "That Karen got exactly what she deserved. Total karma." Maya shot a quick protective glance at her father. David just gave a slight shake of his head, signaling that it was okay. He knew what the young man meant. In the simple calculus of right and wrong, Karen Foster's actions had earned a powerful consequence. But David's perspective was from 30,000 feet, both literally and figuratively. He saw the bigger picture. Karen Foster and Mark Jenkins weren't the disease, they were the symptoms. The disease was a corporate entity that fostered an environment of fierce stress and corner-cutting, squeezing its employees until they either broke or became cruel. He had grounded the airline to treat the disease, but he couldn't escape the fact that in doing so, he had ruined the lives of two of its most visible symptoms. His job was to regulate systems, not to destroy individuals. Yet the two had become inextricably linked. He had signed an order to protect millions of unseen passengers. The unforeseen consequence was the public immolation of a gate agent in Atlanta. He raised his glass of water in a toast to his daughter. To Maya, he said, his voice full of love, "May you always build things that bring people together, and may you do it with integrity and compassion." As her friends cheered, David took a sip of his water, the responsibility of his position settling over him once more. The karma that had struck Karen Foster was indeed hard and real. But David knew that the truest, most meaningful karma would be if this entire ugly incident led to real systemic change, ensuring that no passenger, regardless of their background, ever had to face what he faced at Gate B32 again. His work was far from over. 3 months later, the dust had settled, but the landscape of the American aviation industry had been permanently altered. Orajet was no more. Its assets were carved up and sold for pennies on the dollar in a bankruptcy auction. A larger carrier, Southwest Airlines, acquired its most valuable gates and a handful of its newer aircraft, quietly absorbing them into its own massive operation. The Orajet brand, now synonymous with disaster and discrimination, was erased from airport signs and flight maps, a corporate ghost story whispered among industry veterans. The CEO, Gavin Price, faced federal charges for conspiracy and endangering the safety of a commercial carrier. The Gate B32 incident became required viewing in airline customer service training modules across the country. It was a stark, powerful lesson in what not to do. The video was dissected, not just for the agent's behavior, but for the manager's failure to de-escalate and the systemic pressures that led to the confrontation. David Chanot, leveraging the political capital and public profile the incident had given him, pushed through the most significant passenger rights reform in 2 decades. The Aviation Passenger Bill of Rights 2025 included mandatory recurring implicit bias and de-escalation training for all customer-facing airline employees. It strengthened protections for whistleblowers and established clearer, stricter federal guidelines on what constituted valid grounds for denying a passenger boarding. David, once a respected but largely anonymous bureaucrat, was now one of the most influential figures in Washington, and one of the individuals at the heart of the storm. Mark Jenkins, disgraced and unemployable in any management role, was last seen working as a rental car agent at a small off-airport lot in Orlando. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by the harried, defeated look of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings melted by a reality he couldn't manage. Karen Foster's story was more complex. After losing her home to foreclosure due to the loss of income and the inability to find new work, she moved in with her sister in a different state. The digital harassment eventually faded as the internet's ever-roving eye found new targets, but the damage was done. She was, and would likely always be, gatekeeper Karen. One day, an investigative journalist from a long-form magazine, hoping to write a "Where Are They Now" piece, managed to track her down. He was expecting to find a bitter, unapologetic woman. Instead, he found someone humbled and irrevocably changed. "I watch that video sometimes," she told him, not for a story, but in a quiet, off-the-record conversation. "And I don't recognize that person. That angry, stressed-out woman. I know it's me, but it's not who I am. I let the worst part of my job become the worst part of me. I was so busy trying to hold on to a little bit of power that I forgot how to be a decent human being for 5 minutes." She revealed that she had started volunteering at a local food bank. "I spend my days now helping people who have real problems," she said. "Not 'my flight is delayed' problems. It doesn't fix what I did. But it's something." David Cheneau never sought an update on Karen or Mark. To him, they were never the point. They were data points in a catastrophic system failure. His victory was not in their downfall, but in the new training programs, the stronger regulations, the safer skies. One crisp autumn evening, he was flying home from a conference in Chicago. As he boarded the plane, the gate agent, a young black woman, with a bright professional smile, scanned his boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cheneau," she said warmly. "Have a safe flight." It was simple. It was professional. It was normal. As David settled into his seat, he looked out the window at the bustling tarmac. He realized that this small, unremarkable moment of decency was the truest karma of all. It wasn't the spectacular crash and burn of an airline or the public shaming of an employee. It was the quiet, steady, and irreversible raising of the bar. The system had been shocked, and it had corrected itself. The hard karma had hit, and in its wake, something better had begun to grow. The father had made it to his daughter's graduation, and the regulator had made sure that countless others would now have a better chance of making it to theirs. The story of David Cheneau and Aura Jet is a stark reminder that sometimes the smallest moments of injustice can trigger the most massive consequences. It wasn't just about one gate agent's bad decision. It was about a rotten corporate culture that put profits over people, and the catastrophic result when that culture collided with the one person who could hold it accountable. The karma that unfolded was swift and brutal, not just for the airline, but for the individuals caught in the storm. This real-life drama shows us that our actions, especially those fueled by prejudice or petty power, can have ripple effects we can't even begin to imagine. What do you think? Was the internet mob's reaction justified, or was it a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories about justice, accountability, and real-world consequences are what you love to see, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Thanks for watching.